Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Today marks an important anniversary. 15 years ago today, Al Gore released his movie titled An Inconvenient Truth. Looking at the movie's logo, you can see that the point was to demonize fossil fuels. The logo showed a hurricane coming out of a smokestack. The not-so-subtle message here is that Al Gore wanted people to believe that burning fossil fuels causes hurricanes. A few months earlier was the warmest January on record in the United States. I remember many days in January that year in Fort Collins, Colorado, when I didn't need to wear anything more than a short-sleeved shirt. I was convinced at the time that global warming was real and was the cause of the warm weather. The warm weather of January 2006 was very convenient for marketing Al Gore's movie. The movie won the Academy Award for Best Documentary and was produced by Laurie David. I will be discussing her more later. And not only did Al Gore win the Academy Award for this movie, but he also won the Nobel Peace Prize. This was quite an honor for him because he beat out Irina Sendler for the Nobel Prize. Irina risked her life day in and day out during World War II to rescue 2,500 Jews from the Nazis. Most of them were children, and she smuggled them out past the Nazi guards day after day out of the Warsaw Ghetto. Needless to say, she was taking incredible risks with her life to help out other people. Irina died the following year, so she'll never get the award which Al Gore took from her. Climate fraudster Michael Mann also claimed that he won the Nobel Prize that year, and he even made up a fake plaque to prove it. His Nobel Prize was as legitimate as his science. Now let's look at what Al Gore did to take away the Nobel Prize from Irina Sendler. He made a giant graph of Antarctic ice core data showing temperatures and carbon dioxide levels for the past 650,000 years. On the graph, temperatures are shown in white and carbon dioxide levels are shown in red. You can see that they track each other pretty closely until the last 100 years. Al Gore used this graph to try to convince his audience that carbon dioxide is what controlled the temperature. When carbon dioxide levels went up, temperature went up as well, and when carbon dioxide went down, temperature also went down. Based on his interpretation, a 50 part per million increase in carbon dioxide causes about a 10-degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature. So using Al Gore's interpretation, a 500 part per million increase in CO2 would cause about a 100-degree rise in temperature. This is complete nonsense, but it was good enough to get him the Nobel Prize and have his propaganda film shown to just about every school child in the world. But what the graph actually shows is that for the past 650,000 years, ocean temperatures are what control carbon dioxide levels. When ocean temperatures go up, carbon dioxide levels go up as well, and when ocean temperatures decline, so does carbon dioxide. This is actually very basic chemistry which has been understood for a long time, and it's also very easy to explain why this occurs. If you open up a warm beer, a lot of carbon dioxide foam fizzes out the top, a lot more than will from a cold beer. Warm water cannot hold as much dissolved carbon dioxide as cold water. So when ocean temperatures go up, the oceans outgas carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and vice versa when temperatures go down. That's all that this graph shows is basic chemistry. What Al Gore did was he put the cart before the horse. The graph shows that temperature controls CO2, not the other way around. If Al Gore were correct, the large rise in carbon dioxide over the last century would have caused about a 20-degree increase in temperature, which has not occurred. Al Gore has been making the same mistake for over 30 years. In 1990, he said that any scientist who didn't misinterpret the ice core graphs the way he did was unethical. And when Al Gore became vice president in 1993, he started acting out on his delusions. This is a picture of my good friend Dr. Bill Gray from Colorado State University. He passed away 5 years ago and was the world's leading tropical meteorologist and the person who invented modern hurricane forecasting. Shortly after Al Gore took office in 1993, he invited Bill Gray to come to a climate conference he was holding in Washington, D.C. Dr. Gray told the vice president that he would be happy to attend, even though he's not a big fan of Gore's global warming theories. Gore then shut off Bill Gray's funding, blacklisted him, and Dr. Gray never got another penny of funding out of the U.S. government. Al Gore demanded compliance with his junk science, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize for this sort of unethical activity. Gore may not have understood what he was doing wrong, but his movie producer, Laurie David, did. This is a fraudulent graph which she put into a children's textbook a few years later. What she did was she tampered with the data and reversed the x-axis to make it look like carbon dioxide leads temperature instead of the actual relationship, which is the opposite. Irena Sendler rescued children, while Laurie David and Al Gore corrupted children's minds with lies. Apparently, that's what the Nobel Prize Committee likes. Also in 2006, Al Gore said that unless drastic measures to reduce greenhouse gases are taken within the next 10 years, the world will reach a point of no return. So Al Gore said that we only had until the year 2016 to save the climate. And here we are 15 years later, and global temperatures are 0.1 degrees above normal. There's a lot of cold temperatures out there, and it doesn't really look like Earth burned up 5 years ago like Al Gore predicted. Now let's go back a little bit further to 1989, when the United Nations said we only had 10 years to stop global warming. The United Nations gave us a deadline of the year 2000, but then Al Gore extended it to the year 2016. And now Alexandria Cortez and the Washington Post say that we only have until the year 2030 to stop global warming. The same scam goes on decade after decade, and the scamsters are relying on the short memory of the public. Nobel laureate Al Gore made a lot of predictions, including predicting that the Arctic would be ice-free by the year 2014.
Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years. 7 years from now. In the last few months, it has been harder and harder to misinterpret the signs that our world is spinning out of kilter.
So let's look now at what's happened to Arctic sea ice extent since Al Gore's movie was released 15 years ago. This graph shows Arctic sea ice extent for every day since the start of 2006. All that we see in the graph are seasonal changes in ice extent. The ice melts in the summer and it freezes back in the winter. But there's no trend over the past 15 years. In fact, Arctic sea ice extent right now is about the same as it was in 1989, the year when Alexandria Cortez was born. Al Gore has no clue what he's talking about because his belief system is based on a misunderstanding of the relationship between temperature and carbon dioxide. If Al Gore would have done any actual research and looked at the long-term trends in carbon dioxide and temperature, he would have understood that he was wrong. There's actually very little large-scale relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature over the last 600 million years. The wiggles in carbon dioxide levels shown in Al Gore's giant graph would barely show up on a graph plotted at this scale. Carbon dioxide and temperature act independently. 440 million years ago there was an ice age at a time when carbon dioxide levels were 10 times higher than they are now. Based on Al Gore's theories, it should have been extremely hot at that time. The Earth shouldn't have been covered with ice like it actually was. Equally as damning to Al Gore's theories is that the greatest expansion of life on Earth occurred 540 million years ago when CO2 was right at its peak, 15 times higher than now. Using Al Gore's math, with carbon dioxide levels that high, Earth's temperature should have been over 1,000 degrees and the ocean should have boiled away. Al Gore has no clue what he's talking about, and it's pretty easy to prove that this whole thing is a big scam. Since Al Gore became vice president almost 30 years ago, there's been dozens of international climate agreements, yet carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have continued to rise exponentially. The graph makes it clear that the growth of CO2 in the atmosphere has been completely unaffected by governmental activity. Even the lockdowns over the last year and a half have done nothing to slow the increase in CO2. Governments don't control carbon dioxide, and they certainly don't control the climate, but what they do control is people. H.L. Mencken said over 100 years ago, "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary." 15 years ago when Al Gore's movie came out, Toto was a true believer in global warming. But he's a lot smarter now and is trying to educate others. You can visit him and Kyria on the web at realclimatescience.com.